It's no secret that South Australia is the wine capital of Australia, with brands that embody heritage, innovation and sustainability. We're internationally recognised as a source of premium food and beverages. Our clean and safe environment and robust biosecurity frameworks and traceability systems have seen South Australia become a reliable producer and exporter of top quality produce using world-leading innovative technology and practices. In fact, we're fast becoming a world leader in development and export of agri-tech products, offering services and practices to add value and increase the productivity of South Australia's agricultural industry. And we've invested heavily in 3 world-class universities and specialised institutions to ensure South Australia's food industries become even more competitive, innovative and ecologically sustainable. Like the Plant Accelerator site at the University of Adelaide's Wake campus and our agtech research demonstration farms. With such diverse agricultural production, there's an abundance of compelling investment opportunities within South Australia's food, wine and agribusiness sector just waiting to be explored.
Hi everyone, my name's James Mraz and I'm the Regional Director for the Office of the Agent General. Thank you for joining us today for what should be a really exciting webinar. Our office acts as a point of contact for South Australian companies looking to export to the UK and European markets. We also connect buyers and distributors in the UK and Europe with South Australian businesses back home. Given wine is one of South Australia's major exports, this is a large focus for our team. Our team can help you access a range of export opportunities, providing information on key markets, facilitating introductions and meetings between exporters, buyers and distributors, identify potential grants and funding, stock product samples in our office for distributors, and support within market promotions. Today's webinar will look at both the challenges and opportunities for exporters in the UK, particularly the impacts of COVID, as well as Brexit and the Free Trade Agreement, which are currently being negotiated between the UK and Australia. We will also cover advice for exporters and market trends, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. A lot of you have already provided a lot of questions, so that's going to really help us shape the discussion today. So thank you for participating in that. Our key speakers today, we're a very esteemed company. We've got 2 Masters of Wine. There are only 409 in the world, so we're pretty lucky today. We've got Simon Thorpe, who's an MW, a wine consultant with more than 30 years experience in the international wine trade. Laura Jewell MW, Regional General Manager at Wine Australia, one of our colleagues for the UK and Europe. And then David Cartwright from industry, a director at Seckford Agencies, UK wine agents with an extensive portfolio of New World wines. Before you hear from our expert panellists, I'd like to hand over to our Minister for Trade and Investment, the Honourable Stephen Patterson. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, James. And good evening, everyone, or equally good morning to those who are tuning in from the UK. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Certainly, 2020 has been a challenging year for business right across the globe, and the South Australian Government, we're continually looking at ways to help our South Australian businesses. Because of the current climate, of course, and with business not being able to do much face-to-face, we're certainly looking to improve and expand how we engage digitally with business and with governments more and more. Because there's no getting on plane, instead we must focus on working with our South Australian exports and exporters to connect them with buyers in market via online platforms such as this. So these virtual wine tastings have been hosted in other markets as well. They're an exciting example of how we go about this. It is a new form of engagement, but it really is an excellent way to continue and in some cases start promoting South Australian wine into our key markets. The department I'm responsible for, which is the Department for Trade and Investment, has also undertaken 4 cycles of global webinar series, which each provides market updates, export insights into what our export opportunities are around the world. And these have been led by our in-country representatives as well. We've also been managing a number of programs to help companies adapt to e-commerce. For some of them, they've been doing it. Others need to scale up, while even more are just having to start from scratch. So one of the ways we can help is our South Australian Export Accelerator Program. It's certainly one example of this. It's designed to help companies market themselves internationally with a real focus on providing logistical assistance via air freight as well. We're certainly very pleased to be able to support our local industry by delivering these types of virtual events and programs. And the use of technology like this really is critical. And I encourage everyone who's listening to really access this to help them get online as well. So outside of the virtual setting, of course, we're still going to connect physically. And the way we've been doing this, we've been really working hand in glove with the Australian government to help sure that our direct air freight routes from Adelaide into our key South Australian export markets are maintained. An example of this has been weekly air flights, whether they be from Singapore Airlines, Cathay Pacific, or more recently Qatar. Qatar is really useful in terms of the UK because it provides that market into Doha, and then that becomes a hub into Europe and also the UK as well. On a final note, if I could just encourage everyone to please keep the communications going with my department. They're here to help with your export needs. We certainly have the best wine in the world and really keen to spread that news around the world, share this information, share our wines internationally. So at the moment here in South Australia, just to put in perspective, it's 5:40 p.m, so people are starting to finish work. So I'm really looking forward to now sitting back and enjoy hearing from some, masters of wine. We're really fortunate to have them with us today. So Simon Thorpe will be the first one to be able to tell us what's going on in the UK. Really looking forward to his valuable insights. Over to you, Simon.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and good evening in Australia. Good morning from the UK. So I've got a few slides here, really to set a context for the rest of the discussion. And as the guys have said, we've had some good questions in, which we want really to use as the bulk of the discussion today. But just in terms of context, we've had, as I'm sure everybody has around the world, we've had a pretty weird and in some ways wonderful and in some ways incredibly distressing period of time. And the wine industry really in the UK hasn't been any different from that. It's very much a tale of two different scenarios in the market here. One is in the off trade and online, and one is the on trade. So they're following two very, very different paths. In the off trade, since March, the volume has just been incredibly positive. So since almost exactly when just after the lockdown began here, 23rd of March, I think it was, everybody was rushing to the supermarkets to pick up everything they possibly could off the shelves. And during the lockdown period, the off trade actually for wine showed incredible growth. I mean, it's 26% up for wine, which is in a category which, when you bear in mind, has been declining in the UK since about 2010, 2009, 2010. Those are incredible numbers, and that increase hasn't maintained the whole way through, but we are still seeing some quite significant growth across the categories. As well as that, and another positive sign is that the consumers were trading up. They weren't necessarily buying into luxury, but they were spending a little bit more, and specifically into established brands. Average retail price here has crept over £6, which is, believe it or not, a positive, and that's an ongoing sign as well. From the very latest stats, 2020 calendar year so far, total supermarket sales across all categories has grown by £5.8 billion. And the largest share of that is BWS Beers, Wines and Spirits, with £1.6 billion increase on the same period last year. And again, this is in a period where, over an extended period, where sales growth has been very, very difficult to come by, mostly driven by inflation. In the last week, or the week before last, up to the end of the 12th of September, 3 of that top 4 category growth is in wines, beers and spirits. sadly, and maybe indicatively, the top category in terms of value growth is tobacco. Doesn't say much for the health of the nation at the moment. Online BWS sales, of course, have grown extortionately as well. It's an incredible rise, 78% in the first months, and this is a trend which the supermarkets also are finding. Tesco's, I believe, have converted from about 7% of their total sales to 15% now going online, and Sainsbury's have doubled their capacity for selling online in the last period. So, and they don't see that changing in the future. And away from the supermarkets, obviously it's a little bit more difficult to get precise numbers from the independent retailers and online retailers. But nevertheless, we keep hearing stories of unprecedented growth in the off-premise for retailers across all formats, really. And those who haven't got an online platform are very quickly trying to develop something in order to be able to take advantage of that trend. So the other side of this, and one thing to bear in mind, I guess, which is very, very much an influence here in the marketplace, and the impact on the industry as a whole, is that that growth that we talked about in the off-trade is heavily predicated on a very small number of retailers, and especially when you compare it to the number of operators in the on-trade who throughout the whole of the HoReCa world. There's so many more people who work in this side of our industry. So to have such a negative impact from the COVID pandemic is one that affects so many more people on this side of the equation. But effectively, there was no on-trade for about 2 months, maybe a little bit more, until lockdown was lifted in early July, and then the road to recovery, I suppose you could call it a very unsteady road to recovery, but it is beginning. But even when we all knew that we could take advantage of going out post-lockdown for the very first time, there was still takings significantly down on that same weekend the previous year. And to underline that, trading is down around 50% across the BWS platform in the on-trade for mainly worst hit restaurants and bars, and pubs doing a little bit better, but still only just over 50% down. Things are changing here the whole time, and the recently introduced 10 p.m. curfew for hospitality, i.e. last orders 9:30, everybody out by 10, which brings, for old timers like me, brings back memories of the closing time of 11 o'clock in the past, which was jettisoned for some of the very same reasons that seem to be causing problems now, in that everybody gets about 4 pints in at 9:30 and then leaves the pub all at the same time, and the streets outside are crowded, which is not exactly helpful at the moment. But in that scenario, at least wine is probably the least affected of the BWS categories. There have been some quite fundamental changes to the trading environment for the hospitality sector. Still 25% of on-premise outlets remain closed. That's across the restaurants and bars and pubs. And central London is unrecognisable almost. There have been estimates that there is only 25% of the normal footfall in central London at the moment. And Canary Wharf, I was there a month or so ago. All of the big buildings are empty. There's no footfall at all, apart from a few people in the evening who live nearby who are coming to eat in some of the local restaurants. But it's a huge change. Those numbers are seismic. Together with that, there's because of the ongoing threat of the virus and the environment at the moment, there's a decided lack or drop in consumer confidence of actually visiting pubs, bars and restaurants, and that's not something that you overcome quickly. And there is no expectation of a return to normality, at least within the next 6 months. There may be some changes, and there's a degree of trying to do local measures here to avoid a total lockdown again. We will see, but there are some pluses and minuses going on, but in general, anything approaching normality is not foreseen in the near future. So taking, the normal trading cycle, planning cycle, what's going to happen at Christmas? We don't know, and normally everybody would be planning or have planned, get everything in place by now. Certainly office parties don't seem to be a thing which anybody's discussing, and going out and celebrating is just impossible. I did hear one joke where apparently you can have now 15 people attending a funeral, and some joker said, well, we're going to kill the turkey and invite 15 friends around to celebrate at Christmas. But it's a bit different from a normal year, and the impact, of course, is on the industry as a whole. Is very much that those who are operating in the hospitality sector are looking to survive rather than really looking to develop their business particularly. That there is a lot of innovation for sure, but and a lot of move into online online operations, but mainly the guys are trying to manage their costs. They're trying to work out which of their outlets are most profitable, and they're having to close the rest. Rationalizing and streamlining in order to be able to make things work as much as possible. And the big shadow on the horizon is the end of the furlough scheme, which comes in at the end of next month, and that will see some more quite dramatic impact, I think, on the working population in these sectors. And bear in mind that this is all on top of what in fact was quite a difficult 2019. On-trade wine volume was down 5% in 2019, and the category, the channel itself has been under some stress from other non-COVID related factors for some time. So what does it mean for routes to market, specifically in this forum? So I just mentioned that the supply chain was already under stress for sure from a suffering on-trade, and over many years the off-trade has been somewhat challenged in the UK by the consolidation and an ongoing small number of routes into market in that world. And of course, since March, there's been a huge knock to the kind of network of wholesalers and distributors, and many have done this streamlining of operations, focusing on stock fulfillment, cost efficiency, and cash flow. And there has been one casualty already, one quite high-profile casualty, and one would expect there to be more consolidation when things fall out a little bit. And on the upside, there has been some brilliant pieces of collaboration and partnership between suppliers and customers. It's been really quite good to see buyers not behaving like their normal selves and finding solutions, helping suppliers, and finding innovative ways to get stock on shelf and to work better together. So there's some really good upside there. But of course, anybody focused on the HoReCa channels have been extra challenged, and this leads on to a quite a significant trend, I think, which is direct to consumer, and how those businesses who've been heavily predicated in the on-trade are evaluating their channel market, routes to market, and seeing how they can change, how they can derive some income. The other impact which has happened is that it feels like there's been a softening of the boundaries between on and off trade in terms of channel strategy for brands and for wines. So anybody who's been looking solely to the on trade in order to be able to build their brand is having to assess that, and I think personally, I think that's a good thing, because it's always been a little bit of a difficult scenario, unreal scenario to believe that you can't build brands in both on and off trade, despite their pricing implications, etc. So I think that's a positive. And then there is product and supply chain innovation as well, which has come through. There have been some quite interesting large-scale collaborations, for sure. Matthew Clark and the Co-op getting together for supply chain efficiencies is not something that you would imagine would be first up as an outcome of COVID. But anyway, that has happened. I think also looking further ahead, there probably will be some significant long-term impacts of the current status quo on importer and distributor models. I can't see that there will be a need for quite such heavy sales teams, such extensive sales teams. You imagine that importers and distributors will be a lot more streamlined, and maybe there'll be an element of disintermediation in the whole supply chain here into the UK. We can explore that a little bit more, I think, as we go through the questions. So I just brought up a slide actually from Wine Intelligence, with their permission, because they did some research from June, early days in many ways, into in the whole coronavirus impacted time period. But they were looking at behaviours, consumer behaviours across different countries, and I thought it was quite interesting to see what the things were that they pulled out from that. And you can see that millennials and Gen X have increased their consumption. It's very much a confirmation of this shift to online. The UK has always been quite a heavy adopter of online sales across different categories, and this has really shifted quite significantly further into the psyche now. Many operations are closing down their traditional, or thinking about closing down their traditional high street shops, and moving more onto online. And this brings opportunities, it brings challenges, but it does impact on, or should impact on, the way we think about marketing our brands and how we interact with our customers. Definitely less likely to eat out in the future. Of course, that's a bit controlled as well now by the government. And a common theme across all nations really was to save more and spend less. Which has not historically been a strength of the nation here in the UK, but it's becoming more and more prevalent, I think. Strangely, UK and Australia have a similar theme here, that the smallest number of hedonists, which you wouldn't put it down, knowing the Australian population, wouldn't necessarily guess that. But those who will increase their social and lifestyle activities, there's a small number in the UK and Australia, and a relatively high number of halters, i.e. those who have decided that they will stop. They will stop this. The interesting correlation there as well is that the relatively old age of the wine drinking population does overlap with that halter type behaviour. So the recommendations from Wine Intelligence are for brands to focus, and businesses to focus on their core drinkers, focus on the core and important brands, be agile with innovation, and continue to spend on marketing. It has more cut through. I keep hearing examples of where businesses have actually spent the same amount or increased their marketing spend, and have had almost immediate payback from that spend, from that investment. And there's this interesting point here about avoiding promotional discounts. The supermarkets have got back into their cycle now of the generic 25% off, but there was quite a period where there were very few price promotions, and obviously it didn't have an adverse impact on volume. So there's a lesson to be learned perhaps there in the longer term for that. Cool, thank you, Ben. I think that's me done. We should open up the screen now, because we're going to happily stop listening to me and start listening to Laura and David for their take on things. Laura, should we start with you? You're sitting in front of a beautiful vineyard.
It is glorious, isn't it? Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Jewell. I am the Regional General Manager for Wine Australia, based here in London, and I look after the UK, Europe, Middle East and Africa, although obviously today we're focusing mainly on the UK. And I've been in the role for just over 5.5 years. And prior to that, I was head of wine development at Tesco. And in fact, David and I worked together for quite some time at an importer, a very successful importer called HWCG. And we not only looked after the wines of Jeff Merrill and Evans and Tate and various others, but we also owned a winery, a 42,000-ton winery in Merbein for a few years. And we had a lot of fun with that. But we've moved on since then, and I wanted to put things into context for Australia a little bit more. So looking at the latest export report that was issued for the year to the end of June. And this is obviously just Australian exports to the UK. And for the whole year, volume was down 2%, but value was up 3%, and that's the first time in a while since we've seen that. And then more importantly, in the last quarter, value has increased by 43% and volume by 24%. So it's definitely going in the right direction. But we have to remember that about 85% of what comes to the UK is in bulk or unpackaged. And that has a knock-on effect on the average price per litre, which is sitting at $1.65 at the moment. But both bulk and bottled imports grew in the last quarter. So bulk grew by 46% by value and bottle grew by 39% by value. And the really good news is that the average price per litre of bulk has grown by 16% in the last year, from $1.08 in 2019 to $1.25 in June. If we look at grape varieties, then Shiraz, Chardonnay, Cabernet Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Grigio are all in growth. Sparkling wines are suffering. I think that's probably because we have very little occasion to celebrate, no excuses at the moment. But on the other hand, rosé is going through the roof with 41% growth, but from a small base. I think the Australians are actually finding excuses to drink their own rosé now. They certainly have the climate for it. And even more positively, the latest figures to the end of August, which we don't publish, but which I see, the UK is up 10% in value to $410 million worth of wine being imported into this country. Now, as Simon has said, this sort of 3-month window of pub, bar and restaurant closures has had a knock-on effect, and it's not surprising that the off-trade has grown in that time. And still wine has grown 8% in value in the 12 months to the 13th of June, according to the latest WSTA report, and 23% in value in the 12 weeks to that same period. And Australia is still number one. We shouldn't forget that. We have nearly 23% market share and nearly double the value of its nearest rival, which is Italy at the moment. And we've seen growth of Australia up 4% in value in the last 12 months and 23% in value in the 12 weeks to the middle of June. All of this is off-trade only. All countries are in growth, with the sad exception of South Africa, which has obviously suffered huge losses due to their prohibition on exports during lockdown. And to touch briefly on price points, for all wines, we've seen an increase on per bottle spend, possibly due to lower promotions, fewer promotions, and the turn to indies and online. But the largest growth has been in the £8 to £10 area, which is the sweet spot where we really start to promote. And then briefly, what have we been up to at Wine Australia? Well, the team is working from home. Many of our usual events are on hold. The Nordics, Amsterdam and Provine were all cancelled this year. We should be in Finland this week and we're missing it. So we've had to, like many other companies, pivot into the virtual world, and we've hosted webinars in the UK on the 2020 vintage, on the wine intelligence consumer data, and we've done 2 webinars in Germany in German to the German-speaking audience. And now we've been investing in virtual tastings where we're sending samples out in mini bottles, and we had a great result from our first tasting a couple of weeks ago on McLaren Vale Grenache in advance of International Grenache Day. So looking forward, we're working on 3 main things at the moment. Our annual trade tasting in January, and at the moment we are still continuing to plan for a physical tasting, but we're very aware that things are going to have to change in terms of government guidelines before that can go ahead. And we have a plan B, which is to host a whole week of virtual tastings and seminars if we cannot do the physical tasting. We're also talking to the guys at Provine, at Messe Düsseldorf, working out the options with them. We don't have any exact news, but we are in discussions with them as to how they are going to treat Provine, what we can do, what the impact is. And obviously we are very aware that we're unlikely to have anybody available to travel from Australia at that time in March. So we're working on options at the moment, so watch this space. And our third thing is education. So with our wonderful Australian Wine Discovered education program, we're developing a lot of staff training. Emma Symington, who is also an MW in my team, has just arranged to do a session with the 300 plus wine advisors at Waitrose. She's been doing train the trainers with a number of importers and is in great demand for doing staff training at the moment. So we're keeping busy and keeping our heads above water, most definitely. That's me.
Brilliant, Laura. Thanks very much. Obviously, you know, such a big change and so many uncertainties, especially lying around the 2021 calendar. It's quite difficult, isn't it? I guess. Okay, I think what we might do is we might actually head into we've looked at all the questions that were previously submitted from Australia, and we've kind of grouped them into sections, I guess, and hopefully David can improve his broadband or whatever in order to be able to chip in on this. So David, do feel free if you can hear us to join in. The first real area of question and interest was around new exporters, so people that are looking to export to the UK for the first time. And around you know what advice to give and how COVID has impacted that. Laura, do you want to give your views on that? And I'll
sure. Yeah, I think I've been approached by quite a number of wineries over the last few months looking to get into this market for the first time or re-enter it after a time away. And the obvious thing is do your homework and have a very clear plan of what you want to do. What channel do you want to be in? Do you want to be in the off-trade? Do you want to be in the on-trade? Do you want to be in the independent retailers? What model do you want? Do you want an agent, a distributor? Do you want them to hold stock? Are you going to be selling on consignment? Are you going to hold consignment stock perhaps in Northern Europe that people can draw from, and then that opens up the Northern European markets as well? Look at volumes, look at pricing. I had an approach, giving no names away, from a Pinot Noir producer in Tasmania who had a very small amount of very good, high quality Pinot to sell. And it was actually very clear where to point him because there were some great opportunities, and we know that Tasmania, and I'm sorry, I know we're talking South Australia, but we know that there's a big demand for Tasmanian wine, and although he only had one SKU, there was likely to be a good opportunity. But you need to work out your retail prices, you need to go in, you need to know what support you're going to give, you need to know how much you're going to give away in samples. You need that entire package. And in fact, there are a number of workshops that Wine Australia has been hosting in the last 2 years to help people get export ready, not just for this market, but also for the US and China and across the world. And I believe we're still hosting some of those on a virtual basis. And it's a proper workshop that makes you come up with a plan of action and a strategy for the market of where you want to be and where you want to sell. And I think that's one of my key things is do your homework. We as Wine Australia don't have an official market entry program here. It's really just about using my knowledge and the knowledge of the team, and we will help if we can. And then obviously Austrade are here to help, and the Office of the Agent General of South Australia is also here to help. And we do work together, we talk to each other, so we will help wherever we can.
And has COVID had a big impact? Obviously, it's had a big impact, but would it change the way that you would advise people to behave?
I think it has, in that people need to be aware that importers and distributors are not as keen to extend their portfolios at the moment. There's been quite a lot of reduction of stock holding. There's been quite a lot of reduction of ranges, both in the on-trade and the off-trade. So in the on-trade, where people have opened, they've been selling through what they have first and foremost, rather than getting any new listings. And I think it'll be 2021 before we see that happening. And certainly when we first went into lockdown, we were very aware that many of the grocers and supermarkets were reducing the range in store because they literally had to make room for other more important commodities on the deliveries to the stores. That now has bounced back, but we are aware that ranges were reduced. So the opportunities are fewer.
Yeah, cool. And I can see David. Can you hear now? You're looking good.
You might. Sincere apologies for that. My son was also on a Zoom, so this is a Zoom specific issue. So I do apologise to everybody watching. For some of you, that may have been a great relief not to hear me. But anyway, I will try and help out now. So my sincere apologies, especially to Minister Patterson, who I know is probably the busiest of all of us. On what you said, Simon, and you also reiterated, Laura, there are opportunities in the marketplace, but actually they will take some time to come to fruition if you are not in the marketplace already. Let me say 3 positive things from the start, because there are some tough issues to be considered. First of all, the market for wine sold in the supermarkets over £10 has grown 40% in the last 12 weeks, and is on an MAT basis, it's around a 15% growth. So Laura talked about a bulk price of, or an average price per litre of £1.65. If you have bottled products between $2 and $8.50, that's the £7 to £15 sector. Then is that we have the surplus, which Laura just mentioned. Simon, one of your points was around health and around tobacco. What our company, Secford Agencies, owned by Pippa Woods, started 20 years ago. What we're finding over the last 3 or 4 years, actually, is that there's an amazing interest and now driven into sales of low alcohol, no alcohol, and a sector that we are looking at, lighter alcohol, which when I say lighter, I mean around 9.5%. Absolutely gone through the roof in the coast on shelf. We've had retail expanding distribution. So on the bigger headline of how can we get into the market, innovation, that's an area which is the market is absolutely crying out for. Last point here, again, builds on one of your points, Simon, around the importer distributor model. We're a tiny company at Secford. There's only 10 of us, so we try to live up to those themes that you've just talked about, which is coping, flexing, adapting. And as Laura knows from the time her and I spent working together, I'm absolutely obsessed with the fact that we are in a business called supply chain. We sell a great, beautiful, amazing product called, and it's a supply chain business. So to the shelf, there's a lot of missteps that can happen. And anybody looking into this today, I've asked them to really focus on every part of the business.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, David. We are maybe your son has gone back onto his Zoom call, but it is still a little struggle to hear you at some point. But we definitely getting the message, and I'd reiterate the point that both of you have made. One in terms of the preparation. I can't remember who it was who said that if you have 8 hours to chop down a tree, you need to spend the first 7 of them sharpening your axe. I think that's definitely a very valid strategy at the moment. And the other is about finding your real USP, your point of difference, what differentiates what you're doing from everybody else. Because in a market, it's not necessarily COVID related this, but in a market where there's been so much competition for wine from all over the world. It's still that melting pot of different wines and different propositions. So if you can distinguish exactly what is your purpose, what is it that makes your proposition different and better than everybody else's, then that is really helpful. I spent some time working in the Waitrose buying teams, and there was a managing director there who was a short and rather aggressive ex-military guy who used to run around making sure everybody was doing what they meant to, and he had this analogy about polishing your difference. We must polish our difference, i.e., make sure we know what our difference is, and then make sure that we underline it. We make it as shiny as possible for anybody who's looking at us to be able to see what makes us special. And I think that's really valid, and it's not only for new exporters or people who are looking to re-enter, but also for any brand actually, or any winery.
I would agree with that, Simon, just as an interjection there, particularly when you're talking about off-trade and supermarkets and shelf space. Nobody has elastic shelves. And so if you're going to get a listing, you're going to be throwing somebody else out. Somebody else will be delisted. And generally it tends to be within a country if that's the way the merchandising is done, and most people do merchandise by country these days. And so you have to be aware that yes, you have to have a USP, but you also need to be able to demonstrate the sales benefit of that wine, because it will have to do better than the wine it is replacing. And it isn't necessarily up to you to say, oh, you should take that one out off that shelf and put mine in there. But understanding that that's how buyers think is very important.
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
From just building on what Laura said there, I remember it's a Tesco Maxim. I'm pretty sure it's a Tesco Maxim. Reasons to buy and reasons to sell. Very important. And in fact, I was completing it just yesterday for a new, and asking wineries to fill in some questions were asked were, what's the target customer? What's the rationale for the proposal, building on Laura's point? And the classic and the clearest and most difficult, how does this meet my range objectives? Now, whether you are an independent, those three questions you want to sell wine into this market, whether it's to an independent retailer or to Tesco, for example.
Yeah, one question that kind of I think is very relevant and applies to everybody listening in Australia. I think is there what do we do about the channel, the on-trade channel, is there any point in trying to develop new relationships with distributors here at the moment, or should it just be a wait and see, or do research and then approach the market? Does it throw up? What are the opportunities for developing direct-to-consumer business? How is the world changing in those two channels? And this is not necessarily a Wine Australia question. This is a broad question, I guess. Laura, have you got what do you think about those things?
I think direct to consumer is an interesting one, and we've certainly seen a lot of the retailers, the small independent retailers, surviving and doing well during lockdown because they immediately sorted out their their home deliveries and their delivery service, and they had a website that was transactional. And I think that's been a key element for many of the smaller businesses to be able to survive. And if you can tap into that, then fantastic. I think the idea of the Nike direct to consumer driven by the brand is a long way off in this market for wine. I think the biggest challenge there would be Amazon, and they will be taking a big chunk of market share if they get their act together in this market. Does that answer the question? I think so.
Yeah, and do you think? I mean, yeah, I suppose there is a question about on-trade. Is it best just to leave well alone at the moment? Do you think, or is there, if you're not already in that area, or and a supplementary question, if you are there, what can you do?
I think in the on-trade, it is a wait and see to a certain extent. And then I would hope that next year, many restaurants will have decided it's time for a change. They'll be looking for new listings, and they're often looking for something new and different. And I have this discussion with sommeliers quite frequently about the emerging varieties in Australia. So for instance, a Nero d'Avola from Australia is something quite unusual, but you can't put it up against an Italian Nero d'Avola because the price points will be completely different. But the way that many sommeliers are selling to their customers at the moment is, here's something different, here's something new, whether it's from Georgia or Romania or Greece or any countries, they're always looking for something new and different. So there is definitely opportunity still in the on-trade for getting listings, and not just of the more quirky elements, but certainly fresher styles of Shiraz, cooler climate styles of Cabernet and Pinot, etc. So I think there's still big opportunity for Australia in the on-trade.
Yeah, and I think you know, I get the sense that there's a requirement, or there's an opportunity to raise awareness around those you know, those emerging styles, or the points of just get on the radar of those people, those somms who are thinking about the future rather than thinking about how to maintain their jobs or whatever, and just getting into the psyche maybe of the journalists and those kind of opinion formers, the noisy ones on Twitter and Instagram and on LinkedIn, and using those social media platforms just not necessarily in a very formal way, but just to be able to shout a little bit about what you're doing, what's going on. You know, Instagram is a brilliant tool, really, and you know, it's not something you can do this kind of virtual stalking strategy on Instagram to get into the dialogue with those opinion formers, and then spread that message out gradually as you go. I think we should probably move on. We've talked a lot about COVID, and one of the questions is around what the influence might be for the overall UK wine market in the longer term. And this is a little bit of crystal ball gazing, I guess. And you know, anybody can have a view, but you guys with your many years of experience might have a better view, or a more informed crystal ball than a lot of people. David, have you got a thought as to how we might all emerge from this?
It's a really this is a 64 million Australian dollar question. I think at the moment it's very difficult to look into the future, and I'm still personally with colleagues in my operational mode, and an operational mode I'm focusing on people, supply, demand, and cash. And I was our business was sort of emerging out of let's look into the 6, 12, 18 month time frame as recently as 2 or 3 weeks ago. But with the recent changes to COVID restrictions and the likely oncoming even greater restrictions, then it's very difficult to look into that far into the future. I would say that one of the basics one of the basic principles I always stick to is keep as close to your customers as possible. And building on what we've already said on your analogy with chopping down the tree, now is a great time to be doing the research, because importers and distributors will not be wanting to face an email inbox saying, we want to work with you in the UK, our wines are great. If somebody is saying to me, I have a product, I recognise your customer base, this is unique, and we want to work with you, this is the success it's had in other markets in the sector that you, Sector agencies, are working at, that will get my attention. Recognise that nothing can happen for the next 6 months, but let's just also say there's huge amounts of free research that people can be doing. It would be very easy to look up who has been the Australian most success in Australian retailer in IWC, IWSC, decanter drinks retailing for the last 3 or 4 years. They may be importers or retailers that you might avoid because they clearly have a fantastic South Australia portfolio. At the same time, it's a door that may well be open for people looking to get into the UK. I don't think you can see me holding a bottle of this brand here isn't doing any good. We have worked with bird in hand from the Adelaide Hills now for really not far longer than 3 that we have managed to gain access into a number of quite large retailers as well as the independent sector. Now that business has a winemaking role to many of us watching. It was vital in connecting with sectors and then for us to connect with retailers such as booths, for example.
Cool. Okay. I'm very conscious that I want us to talk about market trends a little bit at the end of this, and we've only got 6 or 7 minutes left. But Laura, do you want to have a quick word about the impact of or thoughts on Brexit and the FTA?
How long is a piece of string? Which was a question I did ask the panelists earlier, and I'm afraid we don't have a crystal ball that tells us how long is the piece of string. I think on the FTA, just putting it into context, the immediate. We don't know when it will be negotiated, and there are various items that are being talked about. So the main one would be the removal of the common customs tariff, but to put it into context, it will only have an impact of about 6 to 7 pence per bottle, and whether the retailers would then pass that on. So there isn't going to be a flood of cheaper Australian wine hitting the UK. It is not going to have a dynamic impact. It can have a positive impact, and we can certainly make the best of it, but it's not about the actual monetary value in itself. Various other areas that are being talked about are VI1 documents, where obviously Australia is well set up because we already use them and issue them. There are other areas like carbonisation in market, blending in market, but then there are also quite a few issues coming out of the Brexit negotiation that are still unknown and we don't have the details of, such as labelling, importer addresses on labelling, other chemical issues, testing of wood for fine wine cases, and also negotiation around certain EU terms that are limited and trademarked, such as Prosecco. So it's, for the Brexit side of it, it's still quite messy and is obviously hurtling towards us like a train for changes at the beginning of January. And for the FTA with Australia, it's more of a slow process, but we know that it is has been started, and we've had some positive results so far in terms of media coverage, so I believe.
Yeah, my sense is I agree with you a lot about the fact that it's not going to be a wonderful opening up of a dam of volume into the market here. I think that that the impact of Brexit in particular is there may be a short-term supply chain challenge at the port and paperwork, and it might be an expensive area to overcome in the near term, but I do think that there will be solutions which are workable in due course. That's a rather glib and easy, facile way of kind of under emphasizing an enormous amount of work that's going on. But I can't see that it's going to be a long-term impact, and I don't get the sense that it's going to change consumer demand enormously either. I think things will carry on after a glitch. I'm sure there'll be a glitch of some sort. They will carry on as relatively normal in terms of demand and supply.
I would agree.
Okay. Right, let's get on to market trends quickly. So there's a question about which grape varieties and wine styles from Australia are growth opportunities in the UK. So David's touched on lower alcohol. What about things like organic and biodynamic and sustainability? And you see that the New Zealanders are continuing to emphasise the sustainability message in their marketing. So what do you think, David? Let's hear from you if you can hear.
Okay. Yeah, I exactly agree with all those actually. The COVID themes, just finishing off from shopper behaviour. What's authentic? What's sustainable? What's healthier for me? Those three themes are absolutely critical, and so they could provide a backdrop for people looking in. Sound, again, using your words, I think, without sounding too glib, what Australia does fantastically well is Chardonnay and Shiraz. So those are what gatekeepers are looking for to me. In fact, let's say, that actually yesterday's shoppers of £10 Shiraz are today's shoppers of Molly-Duca. We look after Molly-Duca Shiraz at 25, 35, 45. So let's not forget the basics, what have you. But the basics of the grape variety, which is obviously on fire, is Malbec. So anybody who planted large volumes of Malbec 5 years ago will be able to make a huge impact on this market without a shadow of a doubt. And also, there are some signs that sparkling wine actually is starting to see some growth. And I think from a gatekeeper point of view, I'm having conversations around sparkling wine with the gatekeepers. So when you think of the success of English sparkling wine that we've had, everybody is a winner, and the high tide takes all boats with them. And English sparkling wines with price points from £15, if you're lucky, more likely £20, or sparkling wines, I think, come back quite quickly.
I think
we've lost
yeah.
lost David completely.
Laura, have you got a view on price points in terms of the opportunities at higher price points? What's work? Have you got are there examples that you know of where there's been particular success?
Well, I didn't want to go into too many details. Certainly, the £10 plus is a small part of the market overall anyway. So £10 plus retail, it's dominated by France and Italy, as you would think. And in the last IRI figures that I get, which are for off-trade only, £10 plus is 1.6% of the market. That's total. And that's about 1.3 million cases and growing at 16%, which is fantastic. Australia has quite a small percentage of that. It's 0.07 million cases, which I work out to be about 70,000 cases, which really is quite a small amount, but it is growing at 29%, so it's outstripping other countries. And if we look at some of the specialists, there are certainly good examples of numbers of wines over £20 in their ranges. So Majestic have 17, Waitrose Cellar have 12, and as a proportion of their ranges, they're certainly well represented. Just picking up on grape varieties, we mentioned the sort of emerging grape varieties earlier, and there's a huge interest in this market for those emerging varieties from Australia. And so if we take I'm not going to go through them all, but the sort of Tempranillo, Sangiovese, Nero d'Avola, Durif, etc., we bring in over half of all wines who have what we call an alternative variety label claim. So it's very popular in this market. And Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio and Merlot are all growing in these markets. And again, the UK is the biggest importer of these from Australia. So we import a much wider range, and as well as the Chardonnay and Shiraz that is our bread and butter, if you like.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you. I mean, my personal experience is very much that there's success where there's a connection between the brand and the consumer, and the ability to be able to build that, so that when there's a Darrenberg's a great example of a brand with personality. Jim Barry Wine's the same. But these are brands where there's something substantial in order. There's a character to it. There's that difference which has been polished, and those tend to be. I think they have more success at those higher price points. Bird in Hand is another one that David's already mentioned. So I think it is around building the stories, as well as obviously the quality and the provenance and the authenticity of the proposition. Right, I'm very conscious that we've got to 10 o'clock. James, do we need to cut off now?
Yes, we've probably just gone a bit over time, but so we might wrap it up here, but I'd like to extend thank you to all of our panelists. Simon, thank you very much for hosting. Laura, for your insights, and David, what we heard was really useful. I just want to stress to the audience, a lot of us have been working from home, or as I like to say, living at work for the last 6 months. So these challenges are relatively common, but a huge amount of value added there. Before I wrap up, I'd just like to mention that Invest in South Australia has created a new government website, which is called invest.sa.gov.au, which is where businesses can list their invest-ready projects. So if there are any people in the audience today who have projects that might be looking for capital, please speak to my colleagues in South Australia, in DTI, who can help with getting these projects onto our website. If you do have any further questions, please get in contact with any of us. Our details will be provided. You can contact me there on my email address or by phone. But we all work really closely together, especially Laura and I, so we're happy to continue a discussion at a more intimate level. The webinar has also been recorded today, so it'll be available on our website. So please do tune in after if you'd like to unpack it. Thanks a lot. Thanks for tuning in.